Hello, Chevre, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, und freilich, begashmis und beruchnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy, physically and spiritually. Today is Yud Tes Shvat, Erev Shabbos Kodesh Parshas Yisro, the Parsha of Matan Torah, and the Boruch Hashem, Monday is going to be Chav Shvat, the Yortzeit of the Rebbetzin, the Rebbe's wife. So as usual, we have to understand the connection between all these things. But before we start, we'll begin with a prayer. And that's a pasuk in Kapitel Tilim, Kapitel Samach Beis, Pasuk Yud Beis, which according to many Mefarshim is talking about something that happens in this week's Parsha. Achaz diber Elihim, Shtayim zu shemoiti, ki oiz Elihim. So Rashi says right away one pshat. Sheshamaiti mitoicho shtayim. Hashem spoke one, achas diber elikim, and out of which I heard two. That's one pshat, which is one aspect of what we're going to speak about today, how the Torah has so many layers. It's so obvious in a certain sense for those that are seeking and searching to see the beauty of Torah, how there's no comparison to anything else. Because straight away, like Rashi says here, Achaz diber elikim shtayim zu shamoiti is the minimum. But it's not only shtayim, it's 100, 1,000. And it says that every single inyan, every single concept of Torah could be interpreted 600,000 ways, representing every single Jew. Every single Jew could find, like the Alter Rebbe talks about in the Akdamas HaMalakit, Makir Mekoy Me'aproti Shebetorah. There's a personal dimension, an aspect to every single thing in Torah. So that's how Torah is amazing. Rashi also over here brings down the word that when it comes to Shabbos, Zocher v'shomer b'diber echad, that's one interpretation. He said the verse Zocher v'shomer at the same time, which is humanly impossible. Shtayim v'shomoiti, then it became two, but the Eibishter first said it, two verses as one. And in some places it says he said the entire Asar Sadibris, that said the Ten Commandments, as one. In any case, so this pasuk Achas Diber Elikim Shtayim Zushamoiti also represents the wonder and the miracles and the miraculous supernatural aspects of what happened when we received the Torah at Sinai, which hands down, what happened at Sinai is the greatest event in the history of mankind. But before we talk about that, we'll address some of the issues of this week's Parsha. I believe the Rebbe invented one of the major aspects, genre you could call it, of Torah, where he speaks about the names of the Parsha. So number one, what is this that this Parsha is called Yisro? What's so special about Yisro? You know, we don't have a Parsha called Avram. We don't have a Parsha called Yitzchak. We don't have a Parsha called Yaakov. Those are the patriarchs, the Avos. And we don't have a Parsha named after them. And over here, we don't have a Parsha. So what's going on over here? Why is there a Parsha named after Yisro? What's the lesson of Yisro? What message is there immediately when we hear the name Yisro? Also, there's a Zohar which says that even though there's a question when exactly this story happened, Yisro's conversion to become a Jew and part of the Jewish nation, but in any case, because the Torah over here tells us how Yisro, Vayishma Yisro, that he came to join the Jewish nation, because the Torah says it over here, we learn out from this that this event, Yisro's conversion, had to precede the most epic, monumental, awesome event ever, the revelation at Sinai. Why? Why is that event, Yisro's conversion, so important as to be a it has to be before the story of Sinai. Like one can't happen without the other. Then the Rebbe also asks in one sikha, which by the way, what I'm going to tell you today is based on two sikhas of the Rebbe. One is in Chelik Dalet, who suffers in the back, and one is Chelik Yud Aleph. But we're just going to take some points and then we present it a certain way, which can help it to make more understood for those that are beginners. So Rashi in the Sikha, the Rebbe in the Sikha Chelik Yud Aleph starts off. It says Vayeme Yisro. There's another verse that says Vayeme Yisro Boruch Hashem, blessed God Asher Hitzel Eschem, that He rescued you. He's talking to the Jews. So the Rebbe brings Omar Azal. He brings a statement of our sages. It seems a bit embarrassing for Moshe Rabbeinu and the Jewish nation, Shalei Amru Baruch, they didn't say Baruch, blessed God, Ad Shaba Yisro v'Amar Boruch Hashem, until Yisro came and said Baruch Hashem. The Rebbe asks, what do you mean? Didn't they praise Hashem so much when it came to the Oz Yashir? We just had Oz Yashir, amazing song and praise to Hashem. So what's the novelty? What does it mean over here? We say Yisro says Baruch. So to understand all of this, another question, Rashi says that Yisro had many names, but then there's the name Yisro, which means added. He added a parsha in the Torah, a whole section which it talks about Yisro's advice to Moshe Rabbeinu with the story with the judges. But again, so why is that so important? There's many, and that's why the parsha should be called Yisro, let's say. But there's also a lot of the people added a lot of other parshas in the Torah. They made chidushim, there's stories, there was questions, but they slavchad, call it whatever you want. Well, what's over here so important about Yisro? So here we come along with Chassidus. As we spoke many times, that Chassidus sheds light, and once we look at it through the lens of Chassidus, everything is different, and the whole thing falls into place. The word Yisro comes from Yisrein Ha'or, the greatest light, an additional light. Min HaChoshech is the light which comes from the darkness. Now this is one of the great principles that Chassidus, and especially Chassidus Chabad, talks about all over. Sometimes we say, Yirida Tzorech Aliyah, that through the descent we come to an ascent, we become stronger and higher. And this can be presented in many ways. When people say that there's something wrong with a document, that it might be a fraud, it might be a forgery, it might be fake, and then it becomes stamped and authorized, notarized in court, then it becomes a much more powerful document. Because even though there was opposition, but because of the opposition, this document had to become strengthened, and now it withstands any opposition. Okay. Now similarly, and I'm not going to elaborate now because this in itself could take a couple of lessons. We are saying that the greatest light comes when this light emerges from the darkness. We took darkness, imagine this, and we transformed this darkness, and we showed how even that darkness is not really darkness, but also light. And this is the story of Yisro. Yisro is not a man, one person, an individual who decided to convert. Yisro was the one who was wise in all the knowledges, systems, disciplines, sciences, religions of the world. So when we say that Yisro converted and he became a Jew, what does that mean? What does that signify? What does that represent? If I told you tomorrow that the Pope, Lahavdal of Havdalas, is going to get up on cable TV, or whatever you call it these days, on internet, and it's going to be broadcast live across the world. And he says, I lived a life which was a mistake. Everything is baloney, pastrami, it's all nothing. Judaism is the only true thing. Could you imagine what that would do to the world? But wait, there's more. Imagine not only the Pope did that, the next day, Ayatollah Achawachadachada got up and made the same announcement. It's about the Jewish God. The Jews got it right. The Torah is the best. Why that's so important is because before a Jew has anything to do with the Torah, he has to know what he's dealing with. And we spoke about this many times, similar to the explanation of the Rizal that says, Baruch To. Why do we have to make the blessings of the Torah before we learn Torah? Because we got to know what we're dealing with. We're dealing with nuclear infinity, God, divinity, beyond. And that is the point, and everything else is interpretation and ramifications and outcomes that come out of that. Like we said many times, where the Gemara says, V'zoisat Torah asher som Moshe. And we said, why does the verse use the word som? This is the Torah that Moshe put forth. And we said, the Gemara says the word som could be interchangeable, the letter sin with the samach. Samach, it says Zocha, if a person merits, the Torah becomes Samchayim. It's a tonic elixir. It brings him life and vitality and spirit, etc., and energy. Lo Zocha, Nasli Samovas. We don't treat the Torah properly, it becomes a poison. So too over here, we have to know Torah is the most powerful light. Torah is the ultimate truth. Torah is the ultimate tonic which can penetrate everything. No limits. Absolutely no limits. Take the Pope. Take the Ayatollah. Take someone who's dabbled in all the black arts and sciences and systems and disciplines. Buddhism, the Aztecs, I don't know what. Take that person who's been there, done that, and has been on a journey for 70, 80 years. And then he gets up on one day and he says, you know what I learned from my whole life? That nothing is like Torah, and Torah is the truth, and then he converts. So it's like saying Yisro is like a world-renowned figure of spiritual leadership that was known, an international figure, like I'm saying, like I'm talking about. And then he converts. We have to have him convert before Matan Torah to understand the beauty and the power of Torah. Because the godliness, which Torah is divinity, it's the same thing. Yisro, Eiraisa, V'kuchabrichu kulachat. Eiraisa and the Eibishter, the Torah and Hashem is one. So there was divine revelation that happened in the world before, throughout all the miracles. V'yedu ki ani havaya. Higher levels of godliness. And this is also the same power, the same force that's in the Torah that could reach even a person like Yisro and penetrate the greatest darkness and illuminate it and show how greater light comes from that very darkness. So I didn't really explain what does it mean that greater light comes from the darkness, but that's the concept. Now, one aspect that we didn't address, which I heard from Rabbi Yoel, it's brought down in the Sefer, B'darkei Chassidim, I think, that Rashi says, Vayishma Yisro, and Ma Shmua Shamo Bo, what did he hear that caused him to come and to convert? And Rashi says, Kriyas Yamsuf Muchams Amalek, the splitting of the sea and the war of Amalek. So many people point out this question. It's two different opinions. One person says Kriyas Yamsuf, another person says Muchams Amalek, and Rashi thinks it seems to make a juxtaposition of both together, a combination. Like it's not either one by themselves, it's both together. In any case, according to Rashi, the way Rashi quotes this statement of our sages. So the question is why? What's the connection between these two? And especially that later on, the pasuk actually clearly says that Moshe, Vayisaper Moshe l'choisnei, Eis kol asher asa Hashem l'parei, u'l'mitzrayim aloydus Yisrael. Moshe told Yisro everything that was done, and then it says, Vayichad Yisro al kol ha'teva asher asa Hashem. The Yisro rejoiced over all the good. So in other words, the pasuk over here says that it's talking about everything. So what's specialty about Kriyas Yamsuf and Muchams Amalek? So the Rebbe in Chelik Yud Aleph gives one interpretation, but there's a Chassidish attached. The Rabbi Yoel said, you know what Yisro realized? That the point over here is Vayishma Yisro. The point is that Yisro heard and then Ubo. Vayishma Yisro koyim midya chayse Moshe, and then it says that he came. Yeah, that's what Rashi says. Vayishma Yisro. What made him come, etc. So what do we see from this? Number one, Vayishma Yisro. It's not only enough that you have to hear. The Friedrich Rebbe writes in the Sichos, Medaf nicht nur hören, nor der hören. It's not only about hearing a sort of passive listening. That may be better than nothing. But really, it's really like a proactive listening. It's a listening that permeates you to your very bones, to the very fiber of your being. That means dead heaven. Dead heaven means you come to an awareness. It comes to a special new level of consciousness because of what you heard. So first of all, Vayishma Yisro means not only you heard, nor at a dead head. And we're going to say that this is Vayichad. There's different interpretations. I'm not mentioning the second pshat and what Rashi says, but according to some commentators, it means that not only he heard, his rejoicing was one that he felt it in his body. I got all shook up. Are you shook up? That's Vayichad. You can't only hear about it. You got to move it. But Rabbi Yoel said of art, Eize Shmur Shamo Bo. What caused him to come? Go to Moshe? Why couldn't he stay at home, isolation? Or listen to the shir in Zoom? You know why? Because he heard that there was something like Kriyas Yamsuf, Shamo Admim V'Yigazu. The nations were scared, but it's short term. But wait, there's more. Not only in short term, there could be an Amalek. What's Amalek? Doubts, kalkite, korcha baderech, klirus, apathy, indifference, which is connected to laziness. Anything to move. I'll do anything not to move. So Vayishma Yisro, what did he hear? What's it that heard? He realized that a person can get excited and even come to conclusions about godliness and realize that it's the hand of God that can only make these miracles and still be an Amalek. Still stand in opposition, still remain stubborn and obstinate and say, I don't care. I'm not going to get touched. I'm not going to get moved. I'm not going to get excited. And not only that, remain in a war against truth for the purpose of just being a rebel. Vayishma Yisro, he saw that there could be revealed miracles and still be a level of indifference and apathy and arrogance. So he realized, Vayishma Yisro, this Kriyas Yamsuf, but there could still be an Amalek. The only solution is that Rebbe. You have to go to a Moshe. It's not only about learning Torah long distance. You have to belong to a shul. You have to belong to shiurim. You have to have a teacher. Aseh lecha rav. You have to have help. And that's what Moshe realized. And that's one of the lessons of Vayishma Yisro. Eize Shmur Shamo Bo. Medav der Herren. It has to permeate you. You have to feel it in your guts and your intestines. And then you have to move. And you have to get a teacher, a spiritual leader, a Rebbe, Mashpia, a Rav, Aseh lecha rav. The connection to Rabbi Turski's Yortzeit is today. Rabbi Avram Yeshua Turski, we'll soon speak about him. His Yortzeit is today. I forgot if I mentioned it before. And the Rebbetzins, Yemei Lulach of Beishvat, and the story of Yisro, and Vayishma Yisro, is that what we see from Yisro and how excited he was that he came to run and convert is that one obvious lesson we have to take is to see the beauty of Torah. There's nothing like Torah. And I believe it can be demonstrated all the time. You know, I get into all discussions all the time with students and people and whatever. And I say, you know what? I want you to show me one value, one virtue, one concept, one truth that you could show me that I don't know about from Torah, and I'll give you $1 billion. And then whatever concept they'll come up with, and I'll show them, what do you mean? It's clearly in the Torah. And they just can't get over it. Like some people, you're living by a book that's over 3,300 and something years old, and you still find it fresh and exciting and never-ending profundity. And the answer is yes. You know why? We're dealing with God. It's totally out of this world. And it's really infinite. Don't you understand? Don't you get it? And everything else is just man-made. Whatever you're looking at, whatever you're studying, whatever you're thinking about is man-made. I'm talking about God. And that's the Torah. And, you know, sometimes I speak also to my students. I say, you know what your problem is? You were born into religious homes. So we take it for granted. But if you were about tshuva, somebody who just discovered Torah on a pshat level, remez, drush, soid, you'd be jumping. You'd be running around the streets and saying, listen up, world. We have treasures over here. We have secrets. We have wisdom beyond anything you could imagine. And there's no comparison. It's incomparable. It's because we're born into it that we don't get excited about it. We take it for granted. And we think if we travel to the Far East or to the Far West, and we go to India, or we go to here, we're going to learn about resurrection, and we're going to learn about spirituality, and we're going to learn about this. What are you talking about? Every single concept is in Torah, deeper, higher, better, broader, beyond. Why? Because it comes from Hashem. So there's a story that the Rebbe speaks about in Kuntas and Yonash Shoteres Achsidus in the beginning. I don't know if I mentioned the story yet. Maybe I did. I don't like saying things that I said already once before. But I find myself in my life teaching students of repeating this story many, many times. And that was that the Frierdiker Rebbe was once on a train. One of these Orient Express. But I'm saying this train. And he was in a car with different thinkers. I actually looked up the letter this morning. It was in the winter of 1913 and 1914. And he was in a compartment with government officials and Christian priests. That's what the Frierdiker Rebbe writes. And they were getting into a whole discussion about Judaism. That with what system of government does Judaism believe in? One person said Judaism is for monarchism. They were having this debate and argument. One person said that Judaism is for socialism. One person said Judaism is for communism. Anyways, you could paraphrase, and one person saying Judaism is for Zionism. Whatever it is. Cover all the isms you want. And the story still applies. Anyways, they're having this conversation. The Frierdiker Rebbe says it was about monarchism, socialism, or communism. Anyways, finally they turned to the Frierdiker Rebbe and he said, and what do you have to say? And he answered them, you're all right. Why? Because in worldly things, we have a rule. There's nothing that's purely good and has no bad in it, and there's nothing that's purely bad and has no good in it. But that rule only applies to man-made things. But if you talk about God, or we talk about the Torah, that's all good. God looked into the Torah, and it's the blueprint for the world, and He created the world through the Torah. The Torah is only good because it's not man-made. So there's a good, because everything of man things, creations, has elements of good. The good which is in all these systems, the good which is in all of these isms, comes from the Torah. That's what the Frierdiker Rebbe answers. Now this story is so fundamental, so amazing, because it makes such a huge difference. Number one, that means if we're looking for a truth, if we're looking for a value or a virtue, go to the original. Go to the good book. The one that's only good. That the whole thing is solid and good. It doesn't have so much that is not good. So first of all, find out in every single situation what the Torah has to say. And realize that whatever you're looking at somewhere else, either really can add to that. Maybe it might present it in a certain language, or words, or vocabulary that can help bring it out to others. But the concept has to stem. The good of it must come from Torah, as the story of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And this is the connection to Rabbi Turski and the Rebbetzin. Once we say that the Torah is the only thing which is pure good and only good, that means whatever the concept is, social justice warriors, hello, whatever social justice warrior you are, that's not related to the Torah, it pales in comparison to what the concept of life, nature, and reality is according to the Torah. If we look at a tree and we see there's a spark of God in the tree, or like the story with the Frierdiker Rebbe, which I'm not going to elaborate now, where he ripped off a leaf of a tree and his father told him, why did you rip off the leaf of the tree? That was a divinity, etc., etc. The whole idea of how we look at the world, how we look at life, how we look at nature is on a higher level. You can't compete because we're looking at it the way it is according to the Torah, which is much more compassionate, much more kind, much more generous, because they're godly traits. And this brings us, by the way, first to the Rebbetzin. The Rebbetzins' level of compassion and the Rebbetzins' level of empathy. And when you read the stories, she was a genius of empathy. And when I mean to say genius of empathy, it's like amazing when you read the stories and you hear how she always was able to make the other person feel good. Whether it's a story about somebody who called up in the middle of the night, I think Rabbi Benjamin Klein, he said a story and he called up and the Rebbetzin answered the phone and he apologized. It was an emergency, 3 o'clock in the morning or something. And the Rebbetzin says, what do you mean? That's what we're here for, to help others. Like, you don't have to apologize. And then there's a story about there was a chassan, Rabbi Shmuel Lu, he came to the house, he poured by mistake a glass of red punch in front of his newly to-be father-in-law in front of the Rebbetzin, and the Rebbetzin just gave a big smile, Mazel Tov. You know, when you make, there's an accent, you say Mazel Tov. So she put Rabbi Shmuel Lu at ease, like, and Rabbi Jaffe, who's the future father-in-law, says the way the Rebbetzin said Mazel Tov, I felt like turning over another glass and making more of a mess of the table. I'm just giving you examples how her empathy was amazing, and it's only a divine person living according to the principles of Torah that would have such a level of empathy. So much selflessness. Only for others. And that's how she lived her whole life. She was a saint of empathy and selflessness. Then we come to Rabbi Turski, which, by the way, this story of the Friedrich Rebbe, where he told them, you know, you're all right, when he was speaking to all these different government people and the priests, remind me of one of the stories that Rabbi Turski would say, which brings out this point. But first, let's talk about Rabbi Turski. So many people are indebted to him. He's a pioneer in the field of helping Jewish people with addictions. But you know what? Today, I would say he was one of the pioneers of mental health. And there's a story with him and the Rebbe said he should go into that field. And the Rebbe wanted him to even work out of New York, because the Rebbe recognized the need for a Jew, especially a Hasidic Jew, who had the right foundations based on the Torah and his history of his father and his grandfather. He had the right heritage, and he would be the right person to be able to combine the sciences of psychology and to be able to guide people of our community. It's a very delicate balance. So Rabbi Turski was a pioneer in this field. And everyone today who's going to that field, and there are so many, owe a great debt to Rabbi Turski. So one of the stories he says to bring out this point of how you're supposed to make the other person feel good, he repeats that he had a teacher. And he says he was an amazing teacher. And he says his name, I forgot already. And he says whenever a student would ask him a question, his teacher would go, "You're 100% right, and now I show you where you're wrong." So Rabbi Turski would say, you see, look at my teacher. First he would say, "You're 100% right." You make the guy feel good. You're 100% right. In other words, your question is amazing, but now I'll show you where you're wrong. It's still not 100%. The question's a good question, but here's your answer. So this is the lesson we take from Parshas Yisro, that it should be Vayichad Yisro. The Baal HaTorah on Vayichad Yisro says one pshat. What does it mean? Vayichad Yisro sheyichad liboy lekeil echad v'nasi Yehudi. He unified his heart, which is like he unified his heart. You could say he brought the echad of Hashem, which is true unity, into his heart. So Vayichad is connected to Achdus Hashem. So we have to get so excited from the Torah and to see the beauty of Torah. You understand that we should come to the Istakel Bikor, the Malka, see the glory of Hashem, how it's revealed through the Torah. And this is the best preparation for this Shabbos of Matan Torah, that we're getting excited, which is the total opposite of the Amalek disease, the Amalek condition, which we're indifferent and we have apathy. So instead of apathy, we learn empathy from Rabbi Turski, who taught us the way to care about people who are in the worst situations and try to lift them up and make them healthy. We live our life in service of others. And the same thing, of course, the Rebbetzin, who was such a remarkable, extraordinary example of empathy. We have to study how she did it. We have to learn from that. And we should go on their ways, and this will bring the Gula Mitzvah Shlema, take it from Yad Mamish, posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisborich, your man in Melbourne.